What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in to talk about 10 of the most unmissable weapons in the final shape. And so we're going to be talking about brand new weapons introduced with the update. That does include primarily expansion weapons, but also a couple that we'll get access to via the season or the episode. And obviously there are loads of weapons in Destiny 2. There's plenty of stuff that folks are using from previous seasons, which are still incredibly strong. But if you're looking for a rundown on 10 of the best weapons that we can pick up with the new content, then hopefully the video today will help you out. Obviously, there'll be some weapons which aren't featured on this list, which you probably think are very strong, so be sure to give us your recommendations down below in the comments. But otherwise, now let's get into it. And so in no particular order right here, firstly, one of the absolute best weapons that we've got access to with this expansion is the Still Hunt Exotic Sniper. It's actually one I didn't pay a ton of attention to at first because I'm a pretty horrible sniper, I'll be honest, but we get Still Hunt via the wildcard quest after the main campaign for Final Shape. And this is a Tex Mechanica exotic sniper, which comes with the intrinsic trait Cade's Retribution, where we can pick up orbs of power or land precision hits to charge the weapon's super bar, and once full, we can long press that to fire golden gun shots, so it basically activates a golden gun version of the weapon. On top of that though, the weapon has golden munitions, where the magazine gains bonus ammo whenever a golden gun shot is acquired, and Sharpshooter, where the weapon gains passive bonuses to target acquisition, aim down sight speed, and flinch resistance. And the bonus increases when the weapon's super mode is active. Now, this is easily one of the highest damage weapons in the game. Again, by landing precision hits or picking up orbs of power, we'll charge that golden gun version of the weapon. And it turns out, for instance, that this became a very good option for things like the Witness encounter, especially for hunters, because there's actually a synergy here with the Celestial Nighthawk exotic helmet. And when Nighthawk is equipped, triggering Still Hunt's exotic perk will load a single high damage golden gun shot, which essentially means that hunters can get off the actual golden gun, as in the super version, as well as the version that comes with Still Hunt. So that's near enough 2 Celestial Nighthawk shots in a damage phase, for instance. And that is on top of the rest of the damage that Still Hunt can do, which on its own is already incredibly strong. So definitely it is not a weapon to sleep on, especially for DPS situations, but it's also a generally good damage weapon, and an incredibly viable option for some of the harder content in the game. So absolutely, Still Hunt is a weapon you should check out if you haven't yet. We're actually going to go straight on to another exotic weapon, and that's the Ergo Sum Sword. This is another post-campaign exotic quest weapon, but of course once it's been acquired we can farm additional rolls on the Pale Heart from Overthrow or the Pathfinder. And a little bit like the exotic class items, this sword can roll exotic intrinsic perks from a whole bunch of different weapons. So it can get Wolfpack rounds, Arc Conductor from Risk Runner, or the Telesto bonus, but it can also get Perfect Fifth from Polaris Lance, as well as the Cloud Strike bonus, Sacred Flame, Insectoid Robot Grenades, and Gathering Light. So there are loads of really cool options here. My personal favorite is actually the Arc Conductor Risk Runner bonus, and for any of the exotic bonuses, they tend to be triggered by the heavy attack on the sword, but it can also get different sword frames, so it can roll the Wave Sword frame. The only other Wave Sword frame we have is actually the Raid Sword, plus it can come in a caster frame, as well as Vortex, Aggressive, or Lightweight frame variants. The one I'm using right here is a caster frame with the Arc Conductor bonus, and after using a heavy attack, we get a few seconds of Arc Conductor, which will chain arc damage to nearby targets. So it's a very unique weapon, isn't necessarily something that everyone will want to use for harder content in the game, but for general play actually, it is fairly strong. We got the Catalyst this week from Grandmaster Excision, and when we pop Transcendent, of course, kills with Ergo Sum will actually extend the state of Transcendence, so we can make that Transcendent super last for an incredibly long time with the weapon, and also any grenade damage that we do while that is active can actually feed ammo back to the weapon via the Catalyst. So it's a very unique thing, but it's also fairly strong if you play the right way with it, so it's definitely another one to test out. Finally, getting onto some of the legendary weapons though, actually, I believe this is the most used weapon in the player base right now, and it's the Call Sidearm. This is a rocket-assisted frame strand sidearm. It drops from the Pale Heart. We actually get access to one initially in the campaign. And obviously with Pale Heart engrams dropping very consistently, as well as weapon rewards, it's actually incredibly easy to get a really good roll of this weapon. Of course, rocket-assisted frames do a lot of damage at base, so they have a really good starting point. And these sidearms fire self-propelled rocket ammunition with projectiles exploding on impact for high damage. So it's one of the highest damage special weapons that we can actually use. And for the Call in particular, really popular rolls include things like Beacon rounds, but in the first trait slot, additionally, Lead from Gold, Demolitionist, and Subsistence are fairly good. Then for trait 2, on top of Hatchling, Vorpal Weapon, Desperate Measures, and even One for All are pretty viable options. And in particular, in the second slot, Hatchling is a really good perk because Obviously, precision final blows will spawn a threadling, and that allows a single kill to get additional kills, but the threadling damage is actually affected by the base weapon damage. So on top of it being able to chunk health away from enemies, it does have that ability to get multiple kills, and then there is the dealer's choice origin trait, and final blows with the weapon grant a small amount of super energy, and equipping multiple weapons from the Pale Heart increases the effect. And so the thing is incredibly strong. If you haven't used it yet, definitely take it for a spin, as currently this is the most used legendary PvE weapon in the game, and that is for a good reason. Another weapon from Pale Heart which is worth paying attention to would be the Bold Endings hand cannon. This is a heavy burst hand cannon. Of course, there are only a couple of these in the game, Warden's Law being the other one, but it also comes with status damage, and in slot 1 it can get things like Headstone, as well as Rapid Hit, Strategist, and To the Pain, which are really the top 4 bonuses in the first trade slot, with the second slot able to get Dragonfly, Demolitionist, as well as Desperate Measures and Golden Tricorn. Currently, a very popular combination is to actually rock Headstone and Dragonfly. In case you're wondering, Headstone and Dragonfly combo will not automatically shatter the crystal with the explosion, so that's kind of unfortunate, but it's still a really strong weapon. If you want Headstone as well as Dragonfly, that still does work. But of course there are other options like Rapid Hit and Dragonfly, for instance, which I think is probably going to be the main draw for the weapon. Of course, it's one of a small number of weapons in the archetype, but I think as well as the first Dragonfly stasis weapon that we have, at least if I'm not mistaken, so there are a couple of unique components to the weapon that I think certainly make it interesting. Next up though, let's talk about the Kvostov. I'll be honest, this was one of the weapons I was least excited for, just because looking at the weapon on paper, it doesn't necessarily seem that exciting. But I guess in a lot of ways, Kvostov isn't necessarily that exciting, but for a primary weapon, the damage that it deals is pretty bonkers. The weapon has the right choice intrinsic trait, and every 7th bullet from the weapon deals additional damage and ricochets to nearby targets. Plus, it has Eyes Up Guardian, and collecting Orbs of Power strengthens the weapon's next several ricochet shots, which allows them to bounce between multiple targets. Plus, it has Shoot to Loot to pick up those orbs. Once you have a few stacks of that, actually, the weapon becomes ridiculous at ad clear. So, obviously, it does mean that it's taking the exotic slot. That will affect some players' interest in the weapon, but as a primary, it is incredibly strong. So it's another one worth not sleeping on in this update. Next up though, I wanted to speak about the Lost Signal Grenade Launcher. Now, this actually comes from the Season Pass and the episode content Echoes, and it's a strand area denial frame grenade launcher. So each projectile creates a lingering pool on impact that deals damage over time, and it's sort of a pool of radial area, which actually pairs with the origin trait where rapid final blows cause targets to explode into a pool of radial area and fluid. So in a way, it's a bit like a legendary Witherhoard, for instance. And for the trait slots, in slot 1, the top 4 bonuses include auto-loading holster, quick draw, as well as lead from gold, and feeding frenzy. Then slot 2 can get unrelenting, as well as reverberation, where final blows with the weapon increase the size of its detonations for a short duration. Then it can get demolitionist and vorpal weapon. Unrelenting has actually turned out to be a pretty popular slot 2 bonus for this, as obviously this is the kind of weapon that you want to use on groups of enemies, and getting those multiple kills will trigger health regeneration. So as well as it sort of passively doing a bit of work, it can also be giving you health back continuously, and there are loads of encounters in the game where that's going to be a really strong perk. The one I'm using right here has lead from gold and unrelenting, but any of those combos that we just mentioned are pretty viable. So much like with the Horde, whether you want to use it for ad clear or extra damage over time in DPS phases or general damage, this is a really good option to have. Next up though, another really popular weapon in this release is the No Hesitation Auto Rifle. Now, this is a solar weapon, and it comes in the support frame archetype, which is capable of healing allies and hurting foes. Harming targets will build a restorative charge, and then hip firing at allies while the weapon is charged will heal them, with rapid healing increasing weapon damage and bestowing restoration to allies. So there's a bunch of content where this weapon is going to be pretty legitimate. Obviously, after making some kills, we can hip fire it at allies and it's going to heal them. And if we do plenty of that, it's going to give restoration to all players as well. Again, it gets the dealer's choice origin trait, but in the first trait slot, it can roll Physic, where rapidly healing allies grants restoration to you and your allies. Obviously, that pairs with the base frame of the weapon incredibly well, but slot 1 can also get Subsistence, Overflow, and Demolitionist as the top 4 bonuses. Then in the second slot, we can get Incandescent. That's always a popular one, spreading Scorch to nearby targets, and of course it makes getting charges for healing very quick. Then it can also get Circle of Life, where rapidly healing allies grants the weapon a period of increased damage, as well as Desperate Measures and Frenzy. So a few really good combinations on this thing. It's a solid auto rifle at base, it's got some good bonuses to be an all-round performer, but on top of that, of course, it has the healing component, and there are those couple of additional traits that can kind of build into that even more. And so there are certainly going to be bits of content where this weapon can be incredibly beneficial. Another weapon I want to talk about here though is the Microcosm Exotic Trace Rifle, and this is a kinetic power weapon which fires a paracausal beam, and this is a beam of kinetic light which deals massive bonus damage to shields, but it also has paracausal imbuement, and final blows with the weapon grant super energy, then the weapon gains bonus damage once your super expires. And so it is a damage focused weapon, does really good damage to shields, so I think there will be instances where this potentially could be pretty good for things like Grandmasters, but it also puts out fairly good damage as well, especially if you want that damage bonus, you definitely have to take advantage of using a super so that you can trigger the bonus damage once the super expires. It isn't the best DPS weapon in the world, but it's a very solid option, and it also has a base 15% bonus to weapon damage because it's a kinetic weapon, so it's quite strong. It also breaks anti-barrier shields, plus some folks have been taking it into PvP where it actually melts Guardians, so something else to keep in mind. Final couple of weapons I want to mention though. Firstly, we've got the Pro Memoria machine gun. Now this is an aggressive frame strand machine gun, and it's a bit of a workhorse weapon really. In the traits, in first slot, we can get Reconstruction, as well as Hatchling, Envious Assassin, or Demolitionist. Then the second slot can get Bait and Switch, as well as Target Lock, Dragonfly, or Desperate Measures. So there are kind of two ways you can take it, either as a DPS weapon, or an ad clear weapon, or a little bit of both. Having Reconstruction as well as Bait and Switch makes this a really solid option. Reconstruction means that it can get an absolutely ridiculous magazine. Obviously Bait and Switch and Target Lock are damage bonuses, but if you're looking more for ad clear, you can get kind of funky rolls like Hatchling and Dragonfly at the same time. Plus there's Envious Assassin, so that first trait slot has a couple of options that give it ridiculous magazine size. And it's just a easy to use machine gun with some really solid bonuses and really solid base stats. Nothing necessarily majorly flashy, just an absolute workhorse of a machine gun. Last weapon I wanted to mention real quick though is the Ill Omen. This is another episode 1 weapon. I think we can get it on the season pass, plus it will drop in the seasonal activities. It is a caster frame stasis sword. Again, it benefits from radial area transposer, where rapid final blows cause targets to explode in a pool of fluid. And the first trade slot's top 4 bonuses are Tireless Blade, Relentless Strikes, Unrelenting, or even Attrition Orbs. Then slot 2 can get Surrounded, as well as Cold Steel, Whirlwind Blade, and Vorpal Weapon. I've got one with Relentless Strikes and Cold Steel, and given the radial area transposer makes targets explode into a pool of radial area and fluid, actually having Cold Steel on this is pretty nice, because it will create that sort of AoE around targets and also slow them at the same time so that they can't escape. And so it's an okay damage option, but also it's fairly good for ad clear. So it's another weapon certainly worth trying out, and for now, those are the top weapons that I think players should look out for in the final shape and episode 1. Of course though, once again, there are plenty of really solid weapons in this update. There are also a load of new world drops which are good too. So there will be things which I haven't mentioned that you think are pretty solid, and you'll have to give us your thoughts on those down in the comments section. We also didn't focus too much on raid weapons here, where there are a couple of pretty solid offerings. We'll perhaps get to that in a separate update, as raid weapons currently have not actually been acquired by that many players, probably because Salvation's Edge is quite a difficult raid. So I don't want to focus on those too much, but give us your thoughts below guys. Hopefully the video has been helpful, and if it has, a rating below very much helps us out on the channel. Plus, be sure to get subscribed so I can keep you posted with more Destiny content. And otherwise, I appreciate you tuning in and hope you guys have an awesome day.